Hello, and welcome back to Of the People. I'm Robert Chernin with my lovely co-host,
Ericka Redic.
Yes, you are. And we are thrilled to having joined us Dr. James Lindsay, best-selling author, mathematician, political commentator, certainly media personality. Dr. Lindsay, welcome to Of the People.
Hey, my pleasure to be here. So if you don't mind, I'll introduce myself a little bit. I'm going to read to you from the top of my SPLC extremist profile. It says, James Lindsay has quickly become a leading voice in the reactionary anti-student inclusion, anti-LGBTQ, and conspiracy propaganda movements. About James Lindsay. James Lindsay regularly shares conspiracy theories about the supposed communist takeover of the world, especially the United States, promotes, quote, groomer rhetoric against the LGBTQ community, and spreads the, quote, white genocide theory that Marxists want to eradicate the white race. With alarmism and fear-mongering, Lindsay incites and segregates his base. It then goes on to say that I made a series of tweets in my own word mocking George Floyd on the anniversary of January 6th, which is true.
You know, I've always wanted to meet a conspiracy theorist. It's nice to meet you.
That is a lot. Where is that written?
Southern Poverty Law Center.
You have made it.
Those words.
You have made it when the Southern Poverty Law Center hates you.
Yeah,
I feel like that's like a badge of honor.
It's pretty big, and I said, the thing they focus on, not quite first, but second on my bio is, it says James Lindsay made a series of tweets mocking George Floyd on the anniversary of January 6th. I don't know how that's super pertinent to being an extremist, but it's really funny. So I said on January 5th this year, comment with what you hope the ghost of George Floyd will bring you for January 6th. And then if you support justice for George Floyd, he brings you presents on Democrat holidays, just like Santa.
Oh my God.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of them.
That would make you a racist. I mean, but don't feel bad. We're all racist now.
Making fun of George Floyd on January 6th is the most racist thing that you can do in New America.
Got it.
Speaking the truth about the racial divide in this country, and the real, not that there's racism, but that everything is now viewed through the lens of racism, and the country was founded on original sin of racism, which is all crap anyway. You know, that makes you racist anyways. But I want to get back,
like yesterday and today, that the sky is racist. Like that literally, because Americans are proving their complicity in systemic white supremacy by not solving the climate crisis fast enough and dealing incorrectly with extreme weather. That's literally, I mean, there was a volcano that erupted probably in somewhere that's not America, and therefore it's white supremacy to mention that the volcano.
Oh my God.
Atmosphere, put water vapor in the atmosphere and caused intense weather for a little while. But, we're not supposed to mention that. It's white supremacy that we're not solving the sky.
Wow. Why there's not a chapter on that in your book, Race Marxism, that got published. Was that in 2021? 22?
Race Marxism
came out?
Yeah, February 21.
21.
No, February 22.
Now, aren't you disappointed that you don't have a chapter on that in your book?
In 2017, I published an academic paper called The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct. And that academic paper argues that penises cause climate change. I didn't realize that it was white supremacy. I had it all wrong.
That is one of my favorite things, James. One of my introductions to you was actually learning about these academic papers that you had written that are all sort of, I don't know if a joke is the right way to put it, because look, for our listeners, you really do have a PhD. You really are a smart guy, but your point was to try to prove, if I understand correctly, how bogus and nonsense these academic papers are. And so you wrote a series of academic papers that got published that are absolute nonsense.
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary of it. We wrote 20 of them, 7 of them got accepted, 4 of them are actually published. It takes a little while between acceptance and publication. And one of them got an award for excellence in scholarship in the field. And there were 7 more that were still under peer review. And our goal was to expose that there was some kind of a corruption between the peers. That peer review is only as good as the peers in some sense. And the community that was forming the basis for how we decide what counts as publishable academic material that our society all takes very seriously, that community itself is corrupt and beholden to an ideology that's actually guiding their processes. I mean, we had other purposes. We wanted to prove that we know enough about it to be able to publish such things, and therefore that they can't just dismiss our criticism as uninformed reaction. But yeah, the primary purpose was to show that something was badly wrong in the theoretical humanities bleeding over into the social sciences. And now we see that it's bled over into everything. Most maybe alarming of all of these things being medicine.
Yes. And you did this years ago. This wasn't like last year or the year before. This was before
we're creeping up on the 5th anniversary.
Yeah, this was before COVID. This was before, the lockdowns and all of that stuff. And you're not a right winger. So you're not coming at this as like a Christian conservative who's trying to attack the, whatever. You would, I think, consider yourself, maybe not liberal is the right word, but you are not. Again, you're not a conservative. You're not like a me or a Robert who, has a fundamental problem with the educational system because of, taking religion out or whatever. You were an academic, basically trying to highlight how foolish academics was and how dangerous.
That's the basic idea. I don't know where to place myself in terms of like politics now. I just do my own thing. I don't really care if people want to call me a conservative, okay, and if they want to call me a liberal, like, okay. I adhere kind of in political philosophy to classical liberalism, which puts me outside of the left-right right winger. I'm not a left winger either. It's like I'm not on the bird at all. There's one bird, left wing, right wing. I'm not on that bird. Like, to hell with that bird. So it's difficult to place me because I'm only concerned to the best of my ability to apprehend it with what's true. And then where that places me is kind of irrelevant to me. I don't really give a crap what social circles that puts me in, which is a big problem for a lot of people, because the main thing they want is to have people with influence or whatever, or even just people in their social circles, and to prioritize that tribal unity over getting to the bottom of things.
That is a big problem. Robert, I think I interrupted a question of yours.
So, James, a question. So talk a little bit about high-level cultural Marxism. I mean, I love the paper, The Conceptual Punist as a Social Construct, which I assume is sort of that toxic masculinity trope that that the left throws around. But talk more broadly about what is cultural Marxism.
Well, we'll start here. The Southern Poverty Law Center says, through his multiple communication channels, Lindsay continues to spread his various conspiracy theories and aversion to what he deems as, quote, wokeness. Most of his rhetoric focuses on the specter of cultural Marxism/communism, a supposed white genocide, and the alleged indoctrination of children by sinister forces. And so that didn't really say a lot about what cultural Marxism is. I think they mentioned it again somewhere. His concentration on combating communism and cultural Marxism in America earned him prominence in the reactionary anti-student inclusion movement. I don't know what that is. That rapidly gained traction through the country at the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's not very helpful, but I did just want to highlight that the Southern Poverty Law Center seems to think that it's important that I'm fighting against this. As a matter of fact, I've been listed as a conspiracy theorist on my Wikipedia, for example, specifically for talking about cultural Marxism. So cultural Marxism is a interesting thing. I apologize that this is going to require a little unpacking, and I hate when things require that. It's not that hard to understand, but there's this weirdness around it. There are a variety of names for a school of thought that arose in the 1920s and 1930s to address the problem that the Bolshevik Revolution only took place in a peasant society, which was exactly the opposite of where Marx said it would work. Yeah. And it would not take place in the West. And one of the architects of this school of thought, who is named Antonio Gramsci, was frustrated that the Italian workers' parties would not unify amongst themselves and trigger a communist revolution in Italy. He was also frustrated that they wouldn't unify with the workers' parties in other countries and internationally, and were in fact most enthralled by the nationalistic aspects of these parties in the first place, the Italian part. And so he was frustrated about this. And of course, that is where the birth of the fascist movement really kind of came from. And so he was trying to write an analysis to explain why it is that, for this so-called school of thought, to explain why it is that Marxism was taking hold in the wrong places and not in the places predicted by Marx, by means not predicted by Marx. And so Lenin was taking over a bunch of peasants by promising them they'd be able to get better work, as opposed to workers rising up and saying work is exploitative and we're going to overthrow our oppressors and seize the means of production. And then thirdly, to understand why it's just not happening in the West overall. So that school of thought is sometimes referred to as Western Marxism. It is sometimes referred to as cultural Marxism, because his answer was that the West had robust cultural institutions that produce and transmit values that repel communism. And in particular, he named 5 cultural institutions, and those were religion, family, education, media, and law, were all in the West attached to Western values, and were transmitting and promoting and maintaining Western values that excluded communism. And so his strategy was to do cultural subversion by entering into those, or infiltrating, I really should say, those cultural institutions and creating a new way of thinking. He called it a counter-hegemony. I'm trying not to use too many big words. Within the institutions that would then promulgate new cultural values out to transform the society from within, so that a communist revolution would be fruitful eventually. And so this is sometimes called cultural Marxism, but the communists, being very savvy operators, claim that cultural Marxism is a dog whistle for disliking Jewish people, that it's an anti-Semitic dog whistle, because many of the people that were involved in the building of Western Marxism were in fact Jewish, or at least they were people who claimed to be Jews, one way or the other, or they had Jewish parentage or something of this kind. What binds them together is not their religion, but rather that they were communists, as evidenced by the fact that they were also big fans later of Mao Zedong, who is famously not very Jewish. It turns out he's sort of Chinese. So Western Marxism, or cultural Marxism, is a school of thought that was architected by Antonio Gramsci in Italy, George Lukács in Hungary primarily, and then the Frankfurt School, which developed obviously in Frankfurt, Germany, at the University of Goethe in Frankfurt, and which was originally called the Institute for Marxism. But then they changed it to the Institute for Social Research so that it would kind of be a little under the radar. And so if you go, for example, now to Wikipedia and you type in cultural Marxism, it'll direct you to a page called Cultural Marxism Conspiracy Theory. This was not true 5 years ago or even 4 years ago. I don't know exactly when that changed, but I remember that it did. But you can now, there is a link that will take you to the old page that explains that there's this whole school of thought that thought to use Marxist conflict-based stratified class analysis across cultural issues, cultural infiltration and subversion, in order to prepare the West to be taken over in a communist revolution, which was going to take complete values subversion and inversion to accomplish. That also explains the aspect of it that is actually a conspiracy theory, that is the Jews run everything and they created communism in order to be able to subvert the West because they want to be, whatever Jewish destruction, Tikkun Olam or whatever the hell Olam that they say it is.
Tikkun Olam.
Yeah, you can see I'm super versed and interested in this. So
Got it.
So cultural Marxism is a school of thought. Maybe it's better just to avoid this stupid SPLC horse to call it Western Marxism. It has definitive fathers who wrote copiously. George Lukács very famously wrote a very, I think, accessible, given that it's communism, book in 1923 called History and Class Consciousness that lays out what became a lot of Western Marxism. Antonio Gramsci wrote this stuff down in what are collected in what's known as the prison notebooks, which span over 3,000 pages that he wrote in prison after the Italian fascists threw him in prison to, quote unquote, stop his brain from working for 20 years. He died in prison 11 years later. So his brain only ended up not working for 9 of the years. And for the other 11, he wrote 3,000 pages of some of the most influential communist doctrine ever written in secret in his prison cell. And so these are known architects. The Frankfurt School arises in 1920-ish, 23-ish, something like that, massively funded and grows in influence. And its, you know, early members are like Max Horkheimer and Walter Benjamin and all these are people with names who wrote books with their names on them. It's like, it's not hard to see what the line of thought or school of thought is. And then eventually, you know, Horkheimer and Marcuse and Adorno, who are big prominent members of the Frankfurt School, Erich Fromm, all Hitler takes a chancellorship in the 30s in Germany. They're like, we better get the hell out of Dodge. And so they were brought to the United States to get asylum from Hitler's fascist regime. And then the United States decided that these people that are like blatant cultural subverters needed to be brought into major institutions like major universities, Brandeis, Columbia, UCLA, UCSD. Maybe one of them ended up in Berkeley for a while. I can't remember. And then also Herbert Marcuse gets stuck in the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA. So this is who's building out the thing that becomes our CIA in the 1940s, if you can imagine. So cultural Marxism is a school of thought that says we're going to use cultural analysis to try to transform the values of the West to make it more fruitful to communism.
So that's where we start. So cultural Marxism basically is like the foundation and the undergirding of all of the separation that we see happening, where you have the you know, the theories or the oh my goodness, what's the, you know,
critical race theory, queer theory,
exactly.
Yeah,
it's like the foundation of all of that stuff.
Yeah. So what was going on? Gramsci had this idea of cultural infiltration and subversion, and that was big. And then Lukács had this idea, who I mentioned, the Hungarian, had this idea that actually class consciousness is an educable thing. It's graduated. It's not like you just wake up one day and you have class consciousness. There are stages of learning, and it can be taught. And so you have this emphasis of bringing it into education and teaching people what it means to have class consciousness. It's not just by getting ranted at by Marxists and reading their books that all of a sudden you're going to have it. There was actually an educational mode that this is the 3rd chapter of History and Class Consciousness for anybody who wants to go read it then for themselves, where he's laying it out. And then the mode of analysis of the Frankfurt School was particularly how is culture produced and how do we subvert the production of culture. And so you have, for example, Theodor Adorno, who I mentioned, being excessively angry about jazz music, saying that jazz was its own form of cultural rot and subversion. And so he had these long things he wrote about how he didn't like jazz music and how this was, you know, indicative of maybe Weimar kind of mentality that would degrade the culture and lead to the fascist catastrophe. And then you had them talking about what they called the culture industry. So they talked about the way that culture and thus, in fact, you as a person, who you think you are in the West and advanced capitalism, is commodified and sold to you. So you are sold through advertisements an image of who you think you're supposed to be, and that person happens to drink Coca-Cola, so you'll go buy Coca-Cola. And so the culture industry became the target of their analysis. In the 1960s, they became frustrated because they realized they are not going to motivate people on economic means, and their cultural analysis was too abstract. And so Marcuse extremely clearly writes down that what has to happen is that we have to abandon the working class as the proletariat revolutionary class and move into different modes of cultural analysis where there is what he called the vital energy for revolution. And that vital energy was to be found, he said, in the ghetto populations, racial minorities, sexual minorities, feminists, and outsiders, who are to be brought together and cobbled together and then enlightened to the concrete nature of their oppression through college students who are being indoctrinated in the schools that they had already infiltrated. This was explicitly written down in One Dimensional Man in a repeated short form in his, it was 64 and 65, his essay Repressive Tolerance. He mentions it, but it's laid out in pretty heavy detail in his 1969 essay, that's a essay on liberation, Counter-Revolution and Revolt, instructs the wholesale infiltration of professions in the entire professional class. So that's Marcuse's writings from 64 to 72, laying this plan out. And he was an extraordinarily influential leftist at the time.
Now that sounds like, when you say that, like, sexual minorities, racial minorities, basically that was the Obama coalition that was formed to get him elected president. It was
that all makes sense.
Right. So if we take all of the people who feel slighted, basically, and market to them that, we're all one group, even though on paper, some of these groups might not otherwise get along. But there's a big gap of time between when we're talking about the 30s and the 60s and 70s and, 2000s when Obama gets elected. So that is... do we think that there was a concerted, intentional effort to degrade and erode all of these institutions in order to get there?
Yes.
Or is it just that it just happened over time?
Also, yes, but both of those things were happening. So this was being infused into the culture, but is primarily being infused into the culture through education. Entertainment started catching on later. McCarthy was not wrong about the communist influences in Hollywood, but it was primarily being infused into the culture through education. And there was a concerted effort for them to get into education at all levels. That's a direct quote from Marcuse in Counter-Revolution and Revolt in 1972. And the goal, and so you bring up Obama. None of this is abstract. None of this is like just mystery conspiracies floating out in the air. I bring up Marcuse. We'll get to Obama. Watch this. So Marcuse had all these ideas, and he pushed all these ideas into the university at every level. And the university system, for whatever reasons, maybe Shelby Steele is one of the most enlightening writers on this issue, was caving into this leftist agenda over and over and over again through the 60s and 70s. Massive amounts of white guilt, or whatever, as Shelby Steele attributes it to. They were taking it up. They were building out women's departments or women's studies departments. They were building out race studies departments. They were building out ethnic studies. Became law in 67 or 8 or something like that in California to have ethnic studies education at the UC system. And so they were building out this educational apparatus, because if you get the education system, you train the students, thus you get the future professionals, and the future professionals shape the world. And so it's pretty clear how this works. But one of Marcuse's students specifically was Angela Davis. It was one of his PhD students. And Angela Davis went on to help found this thing called the Combahee River Collective, which was a collective of Black feminist socialist lesbians who were the first ones to lay out this kind of intersectional idea that all of the forms of oppression are interlinked: sex, class, race, sexuality, and so on, and that it has to be understood in that way, which later got codified by Kimberly Crenshaw. Well, Kimberly Crenshaw was a PhD student. She's the one famous for so-called intersectionality. She named it. She's considered also the founding mother of critical race theory, which she also named. But she was a PhD, or doctoral, I guess it's JD probably, student, I don't know which doctorate it is, of Derek Bell, who is credited as actually the father of critical race theory. Derek Bell was a mentor of Barack Obama, who was teaching him the same exact legal theory before that. And Obama held Bell up and honored him. More than that, the same strategy was implemented by the dying radical guard, not dying in the physical dying sense, but the radicalism of the 1960s transformed into a radicalism into the institutions. You can actually read this in, say, Isaac Gottesman's History of the Critical Turn in Education, which goes by that title. He says the first sentence of the book is, where did all the 60s radicals go? Not to yuppiedom, not to the religious cults, but to the classroom. And if you look at the history with like Bill Ayers and Bernadette Dorn and all of these hardcore weather underground radicals, that's exactly what they did. Bernadette Dorn did her time or whatever it was. She got in trouble for being a criminal and ended up at Northwestern University in the English department for 30 years. And then you take that, you add all that together, and what you end up with is that Bernadette Dorn and Bill Ayers also were the ones who mentored Barack Obama directly into politics. And so you see the roots of the cultural spread, you see the takeover of the institutions, and you see the mentoring of the guy who used it to launch into power. And as they said when he got elected, to transform America fundamentally.
Right. And then he literally utilized every opportunity to split us apart by race. So and Michael Brown looked like my son or whoever it was. And every opportunity to
every emotional
infuse
string
white
you could
guilt.
pull on.
Yeah, exactly. And it was supposed to be that this was evidence that we weren't racist anymore, right? Like Americans thought, okay, now we can finally put this question to bed. We can finally set aside this, the original sin of slavery. And instead, what it actually did was create the most racial division that we could imagine, and race relations have gone down, and then it's the justification for riots and rioting and all of this additional hatred and things like that.
That's Marxism for you. Marxism claims that all these mysterious forces out there, capitalism, white supremacy, whatever, alienate people from their true selves, each other, their work, and the fruits of their labors. But the truth is, it alienates people. It teaches them to feel alienated from what they're doing, alienated from the society, alienated from their neighbor. It teaches them grievance. And that's why we call the papers thing the Grievance Studies Affair. It teaches that specifically. And then it makes use of that. It induces alienation and makes use of that alienation to try to split apart societies. It's exactly how it works.
Wow. So my question for you, this is all very informative. I appreciate it, James. So how do you fight back against this? I mean, you've thrown a lot of good information out, and I understand the line from the 20s and the foundation of communism all the way through today. It does bring to mind, I assume you've heard the name Yuri Bezmenov.
Yes, of course.
Right. So, and for those of our listeners who don't know, so he was a former KGB agent who either immigrated or just escaped communist Russia, lived in Canada, gave an interview in the 70s, which if you read it, it's on video, by the way. I forget who did the interview, but basically said that there is this long-range plan, even after the USSR formally dissipated or broke apart, to subvert America through taking over cultural institutions. Now, I'm overly simplifying, James, what you just said, because you have so much more information. My question to you really is, how do you fight back against this? Because most people, especially with the cacophony of noise that is now the media or now information through technology and other things, we choose our information in the same sort of micro-targeted silos we buy our Adidas or our sneakers. Right? We only want to hear from the echo chamber that's going to reinforce what we already think. And since we're already in a culture war, and it's not a hot war, but it's a war nonetheless, how do you fight back against this?
Well, I mean, you actually just kind of pointed to part of it. What we know is that if this cultural infiltration has taken place, especially through entities of media, education, and so on, what has to happen is that you just identified that people are going and listening to what they want to hear. Well, so distrust in the organizations that are pushing the elements of this line has to be sown as widely as possible. They should not be trusted because they're using their platforms to do propaganda, and that falls on the back of exposing what's going on. So that's why I spend so much time elaborating upon this history so that people can see and understand what we're dealing with. We're finally, after years of me speaking up about this, starting to realize there's a Marxist cultural revolution happening in this country, and we have to respond to it as what it is. Practically speaking, there's a lot of having to take risks by telling the truth, doing the right thing when it's costly, like that fellow on the subway, Daniel Penny, who protected the subway and he got arrested for it. And it's going to take people taking risks that get them in trouble, smart, calculated risks that you have to have some skin in the game. You have to be willing to lose something, or otherwise they've got you in essence by the balls. And so those are things that people have to do. Lawsuits are going to have to be filed, particularly smart and strategic ones. But that only follows after somebody has taken a risk and ended up legally injured in some way. And so people are going to have to be willing to stand up, tell the truth, do the right thing, get the legal injury, and turn around and sue. All of which is costly and difficult. But as you acknowledge, it's a war. If we were building tanks, they're costly and difficult to build and transport too. Supply lines are difficult to maintain. These are the kinds of ways that we have to think about fighting back. Your average everyday person, though, they have to start nourishing the things that are close to them that keep their head straight. The kids say, get outside and touch grass. You should definitely be working on things that protect the kind of mental and emotional state that you're in. Don't get manipulated. If you get mad at social media, it's time to get off of it right now and go away. If you're watching television, you need to understand it's designed to manipulate your emotions to buy the thing in the commercial. So stop watching it because it's manipulating your emotions. These kinds of little kind of hygiene activities are going to be very necessary.
And that's what you're not saying disengage from those things. You're saying, no, engage with those things, but take breaks. Make sure
he's saying engage in America, disengage from those things that are harmful.
That's right. It's to learn to discern. Like, for instance, I don't watch cable news whatsoever. I find news other ways. And the reason is, I know there's lots of agendas, there's lots of manipulation and so on social media, which is where I end up finding much of it. But that at least has this kind of scattershot multitude of voices providing the information plus the context that you might see it in, that you can then weigh for yourself. Cable news is designed to do one thing and one thing only, which is not just specifically to propagandize you. It is to work up your emotions so you buy the thing in the first commercial. That is actually their business model. That has been their business model for 10 years, which means even if you have a discerning mind, you still have the situation that it's working up your emotions. I used to tell people the best thing to do to stay sane in all of this is turn off the TV. And they'd come back to me and say, well, what about Tucker Carlson? And I'd say, did I stutter? The point of his show was still to get people's emotions worked up to sell whatever in the first commercial block of the block.
Yep. That's what I think. That one of the things that I hear from people a lot is, the culture war. I'm afraid to be in the culture war, or don't get involved in the culture war. And I'm like, no, that is the battleground right now.
Ericka, they're involved in the war whether they want to be or not. The only question is, do they know it, and are they willing to carry the weight and join the fight? Because that's why, look, you and I have talked about this. That's why the elite, and that's sort of a colloquialism, but let's just talk about the people that are controlling the mechanism and wheels of power, want people to be distracted, want people to be on the sidelines, don't want people to get involved, right? Because, and that's why someone, and I'm not arguing pro-Trump or against Trump, but that's why Brexit, Bolsonaro, Trump, the ones that really sort of were able to harness a populist movement scared the out of the people that are pushing this, what I will call cultural Marxism.
Yeah.
James, we're running out of time here. Your last thoughts on what I just said. And then if you could please, this has been so informative. Can you please give us where people can reach you, how they can contact you, and learn more about this? And let's go from there.
No, my last thoughts are exactly what you just said. The Trump, Bolsonaro, Brexit scared the living crap out of these people because it actually kind of started to break through their propaganda, and it started to empower things that they didn't have completely under their control, which is what they want. The goal is to push people out of the game one way or the other. One way is to keep them on the bench so they never get on the court in the first place. And another way is to make them feel like the game can't be won, so just set it down. It'll be easier for me if I just go along with it. But that's all an illusion. The truth is, it's safer for everybody the more people that speak up against it. If you think something's wrong and you aren't speaking up, then that's not good. You've got to start speaking up about it, because the more people who are silent, the less of a resistance there is. Everywhere large numbers of people, and I'm talking, only a couple, maybe 10 to 20% of the population have spoken up. Think vaccine passports, for example. They have not been able to implement their agendas. And there are countless examples of these things. We're not going to go through them all on a time crunch, but there are lots of examples for where we've stood up and said no, and it worked, and it will continue to work, but it requires people to be engaged and willing to take the risks and the hits. Where people can find me, well, first of all, the message there is don't quit. Get involved and don't quit. Even if all you can do is something small, get involved and don't quit. Do the right thing every time. But where you can find me, my website is newdiscourses.com. So you can find my podcasts, my articles, and so on there, videos. You can find me on social media at Conceptual James. I'm on all of them but Facebook, from which I am permanently banned. And you can find for a meme. And it's hard to get on my Instagram, so it's worth the effort probably. And then the company is at New Discourses on social media across all the platforms. So you can find New Discourses on all of the social media platforms.
Well, and I just love, James, you were one of the original people that got banned from Twitter before Elon Musk bought it and took over. You coined, whether you were the first one ever to say it, but you definitely, I remember when you got kicked off of Twitter for the OK Groomer tweet, and what a storm that set off on the internet. It was amazing. And this idea that you are willing to be a voice and say the thing out loud, and risk, being banned, being silenced, to say the thing that needs to be said, is one of the things that I appreciate so much about you.
Oh, thanks, Ericka. That's all true. That all happened.
Yes. Luckily, Elon Musk. Now you're back making everybody mad again.
That's
I
true
love
too.
it.
If you're not
Make
stirring the
Twitter
pot,
mad again.
if you're not stirring the pot and making people mad or getting hate mail, you're not making a difference. So, James, thank you so much for joining us on Of the People. Like I said, this is probably the quickest segment went through that I've ever been in. It just flew by. So thank you. Hopefully you'll come again. We appreciate you joining us. Folks,
Yeah,
you're listening to Of the People with Chernin and Ericka Redic. We'll be right back after break.